Welcome back to Crimson Threads, the channel that unravels the most chilling and twisted true crime stories. Every week, we delve into the dark side of human nature, exploring the shadows that lurk behind seemingly ordinary lives. Today, we have a story that is not for the faint of heart. It's a case that will make you question everything you thought you knew about the people you share your life with. A tale of deception, brutality, and a chilling calmness in the face of unspeakable acts. Before we untangle this web of horror, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of our deep dives into the criminal mind. Now, prepare yourselves as we uncover the story of a woman who killed her husband, chopped up his body, turned him into sausages, and then coolly went on a business trip. Eleanor and David Vance were the couple everyone envied. From the outside, their life in the quiet, leafy suburb of Maple Creek was a portrait of domestic bliss. They lived in a charming Victorian house with a meticulously manicured garden, drove sensible cars, and were active members of the local community. David, a charismatic and successful architect, was the life of every party, his booming laughter echoing through their spacious home during their frequent dinner soirees. Eleanor, a poised and intelligent art consultant, was the perfect hostess, her serene smile never faltering as she moved gracefully among their guests, ensuring everyone's glass was always full. To their friends and neighbors, they were the epitome of a happy, successful couple. They had been married for 15 years, and their public displays of affection were a constant source of admiration. A loving glance across a crowded room, a gentle touch on the small of her back, a shared, secret smile, these were the small, intimate gestures that painted a picture of a love that was not only enduring but thriving. They traveled extensively, their social media feeds a curated gallery of exotic destinations and sun-drenched beaches. They were, by all accounts, living the dream. But behind the closed doors of their picturesque home, a different reality was unfolding. The perfect facade of the Vances marriage was a carefully constructed illusion, a fragile veneer that concealed a dark and festering resentment. The laughter that filled their home during parties was often replaced by a suffocating silence when they were alone. The loving glances became icy stares, and the gentle touches were supplanted by a palpable tension that hung heavy in the air. The cracks in their marriage had begun to appear years ago, small fissures that had widened over time into a gaping chasm. David's gregarious nature, so charming in public, had a darker side. He was a man who craved attention, who needed to be the center of every universe. His charisma was a mask for a deep-seated insecurity, a need for constant validation that manifested as a cruel and manipulative form of control over Eleanor. He belittled her opinions in private, dismissed her achievements, and slowly, insidiously, chipped away at her self-esteem. Eleanor, in turn, had retreated into herself. Her calm and composed exterior was a fortress she had built to protect herself from his emotional onslaughts. She had once been a vibrant and passionate woman, her laughter as loud and infectious as his. But years of his subtle psychological abuse had extinguished her inner fire, leaving behind a cold, hard ember of resentment. She had become a master of suppression, her emotions locked away in a vault so deep that even she had begun to lose the key. The turning point, the moment the ember of resentment began to smolder with a dangerous heat, came with the discovery of David's infidelities. It wasn't a single, dramatic revelation, but a slow, agonizing trickle of clues. A lipstick-stained collar, a whispered phone call in the dead of night, a credit card statement with charges from a seedy motel on the other side of town. Each discovery was a fresh wound, a confirmation of her deepest fears. When she finally confronted him, he didn't deny it. Instead, he had laughed, a cruel, dismissive sound that had echoed the hollowness in her heart. He had told her she was being hysterical, that it was just a bit of harmless fun, that she should be grateful for the life he had given her. His arrogance, his utter lack of remorse, was the final straw. It was in that moment that the love she had once felt for him curdled into a cold, black hatred. The idea, when it first took root in her mind, was a fleeting, terrifying thought. A whisper in the dark, a phantom that she tried to banish from her consciousness. But the whisper grew louder, more insistent, until it became a deafening roar. The thought of a life without him, a life free from his suffocating presence, was as seductive a fantasy. The fantasy, however, soon began to morph into a plan. Eleanor, the meticulous art consultant, approached the task with the same cool, calculating precision she applied to her work. She spent weeks researching, her late-night internet searches a dark and twisted rabbit hole of forensic science, human anatomy, and the art of butchery. She learned about the best ways to dismember a human body, the most effective methods of disposing of evidence, the chemical compounds that could erase the telltale signs of a bloody crime. She chose the date with care, the weekend before her annual business trip to a prestigious art conference in Chicago. It was the perfect alibi, a pre-planned and verifiable reason for her absence. The week leading up to that fateful weekend was a masterclass in deception. She was more attentive, more affectionate than she had been in years. She cooked his favorite meals, complimented his work, and even initiated intimacy, a cold, calculated act that made her stomach churn. David, blinded by his own ego, saw it as a sign of her renewed devotion, a victory in their silent war. He was oblivious to the storm that was about to break. The night of the murder was, ironically, a night like any other. They had dinner, a quiet, tense affair. He had, as usual, spent most of the meal talking about himself, his latest architectural triumph, the accolades he was receiving from his clients. She had listened, her face a mask of serene interest, while inside, her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat counting down the final moments of his life. After dinner, she had suggested they have a glass of his favorite single malt whiskey in the study. She had prepared the glasses earlier, lacing his with a lethal dose of sleeping pills, a powerful sedative she had obtained from a shady online pharmacy. He had drained the glass in one gulp, his back to her as he admired a new painting she had hung on the wall. He had turned to say something, a self-satisfied smirk on his face, but the words had died on his lips. His eyes had widened in confusion as a wave of dizziness washed over him. He had stumbled, his hand reaching out for the back of a chair, but his legs had buckled beneath him. He had collapsed onto the plush Persian rug, his body a dead weight. Eleanor had stood over him, her breath catching in her throat. For a moment, a wave of panic threatened to engulf her. But then, she looked down at his face, peaceful in its drug-induced slumber, and the panic subsided, replaced by a cold, steely resolve. She had dragged his body, a surprisingly difficult task, to the basement, a place he rarely ventured, preferring the bright, airy spaces of the upper floors. The basement was her domain, a cool, dark space that housed her art supplies, her pottery wheel, and now, the tools of her grim task. She had laid out a large plastic tarp on the concrete floor, a macabre picnic blanket. She had changed into a set of old overalls, her hair tied back in a tight bun. And then, with a butcher's knife she had sharpened to a razor's edge, she had begun. The hours that followed were a blur of blood and gore. The act of dismembering a human body, she discovered, was a brutal, physically demanding task. It was nothing like the clinical descriptions she had read online. It was messy, it was gruesome, and it was emotionally draining. But she had pushed through, her mind a cold, detached machine, focusing on the task at hand. She had separated flesh from bone, her movements precise and efficient. She had worked through the night, the only sounds the sickening squelch of the knife and the rhythmic drip of blood onto the plastic tarp. By the time the first rays of dawn pierced through the small basement window, the grim task was done. The man who had been her husband was no more. In his place were neatly wrapped parcels of meat, stored in the large freezer she had bought for the occasion, and a pile of bones, which she had meticulously cleaned and bleached. The most chilling part of her plan was yet to come. She had read about a case in Eastern Europe, a story of a woman who had disposed of her husband's body by turning him into sausages and feeding him to the local stray dogs. The story had both horrified and fascinated her. It was a method of disposal that was not only practical but also deeply symbolic. It was a final, grotesque act of desecration, a way of reducing the man who had tormented her for so long to nothing more than animal feed. With the same methodical precision, she had set up a meat grinder, a heavy-duty machine she had purchased online. She had mixed the ground meat with spices, a pungent blend of herbs and seasonings that masked the true nature of its origin. And then, she had begun the nauseating process of stuffing the mixture into sausage casings. The rhythmic whir of the machine was a grotesque counterpoint to the chirping of the birds outside, heralding the start of a new day. As she worked, a strange sense of calm had settled over her. The rage, the hatred, the years of suppressed emotions had dissipated, leaving behind a cold, empty void. She was no longer Eleanor Vance, the long-suffering wife. She was something else, something new, something terrifyingly detached from the woman she had once been. After the last sausage was made, she had begun the arduous task of cleaning up. She had scrubbed the basement floor until it was spotless, a feat made easier by the protective tarp. She had disposed of the bloody overalls and the cleaning supplies in a series of anonymous dumpsters across town. She had bathed, a long, hot shower that washed away the physical and metaphorical stains of her crime. And then, with the house silent and pristine, the gruesome evidence of her crime hidden away in the freezer, she had packed her suitcase for her business trip to Chicago. She had laid out her clothes, a series of elegant and professional outfits. She had checked her flight details, her hotel reservations. She had prepared her presentation for the art conference, her mind sharp and focused. As she zipped up her suitcase, she had caught a glimpse of herself in the full-length mirror. A woman, poised and elegant, a picture of calm and composure. There was no trace of the horror that had unfolded in the basement just hours before. The perfect facade was back in place, stronger and more impenetrable than ever before. The woman in the mirror had killed her husband, chopped up his body, and turned him into sausages. And now she was ready to go on a business trip. The flight to Chicago was uneventful. Eleanor sat in her business class seat, sipping on a glass of champagne, a picture of serene sophistication. She made polite conversation with the man sitting next to her, a jovial sales executive who was impressed by her knowledge of contemporary art. She smiled. She laughed at his jokes. She was the epitome of a successful, confident woman on her way to a prestigious conference. No one could have guessed that in the cargo hold below, her suitcase sat next to another, a specially designed, temperature-controlled container filled with dozens of homemade sausages. The art conference was a whirlwind of activity. Eleanor was in her element, networking with gallery owners, schmoozing with wealthy collectors, and delivering a captivating presentation on the resurgence of postmodern sculpture. She was articulate, she was insightful, and she was utterly convincing. Her colleagues were impressed by her professionalism, her unwavering focus. She was the star of the conference, her name on everyone's lips. During the day, she was the consummate professional. But at night, in the sterile anonymity of her hotel room, the mask would occasionally slip. The silence of the room would become a deafening roar, filled with the echoes of the whirring meat grinder and the sickening squelch of the butcher's knife. She would wake up in a cold sweat, her heart pounding in her chest, the phantom smell of blood in her nostrils. But then, she would take a deep, steadying breath, her mind a fortress of cold, hard logic. She would remind herself that she had been meticulous, that she had left no trace of her crime. She would get up, have a glass of water, and force herself back to sleep, her composure restored. One evening, after a particularly successful day at the conference, she decided to put the final, gruesome part of her plan into action. She hailed a taxi and asked the driver to take her to the outskirts of the city, to a desolate industrial area she had researched online. It was a place where the city's forgotten souls gathered, a place of abandoned warehouses and stray, hungry dogs. Under the dim glow of a flickering streetlight, she opened the temperature-controlled container. The smell of the spiced meat filled the cold night air. One by one, she began to toss the sausages into the darkness. The stray dogs, their ribs showing through their matted fur, emerged from the shadows, their eyes gleaming in the darkness. They devoured the sausages with a ravenous hunger, their growls and snarls the only sounds in the desolate landscape. Eleanor watched, her face a mask of cold detachment, as the last physical traces of her husband were consumed by the city's forgotten creatures. It was a fitting end, she thought, for a man who had devoured her soul for so long. Back in Maple Creek, however, the threads of her carefully woven deception were beginning to unravel. David's sudden disappearance had not gone unnoticed. He was a man of routine, a creature of habit. His failure to show up for his weekly golf game with his friends was the first red flag. His phone went straight to voicemail, his emails went unanswered. His business partner, a man who had known him for 20 years, grew increasingly concerned. David was not the type of man to simply disappear without a word. The first person to officially raise the alarm was David's younger sister, Clara. She and her brother were close, speaking on the phone at least twice a week. When she hadn't heard from him in over a week, she had called Eleanor in Chicago. Eleanor had been the picture of calm concern. She had told Clara that she and David had had a small argument before she had left for her trip. He had been angry, she had said, and had probably gone off to cool down. It was something he had done before, she had assured her, a little white lie that she had delivered with a convincing tremor in her voice. She had promised to call the moment she heard from him. But as the days turned into a week, and there was still no word from David, Clara's concern grew into a gnawing fear. She called the Maple Creek Police Department and filed a missing person report. The initial investigation was routine. The police interviewed Eleanor upon her return from Chicago. She was the distraught wife, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, her voice choked with emotion. She told them the same story she had told Clara, embellishing it with details of their argument, painting a picture of a man who was emotionally volatile and prone to dramatic disappearances. The police, at first, had no reason to doubt her. She was a respected member of the community, a woman with an impeccable reputation. But as the investigation deepened, inconsistencies began to emerge. The police spoke to David's friends and family, and a different picture of the Van Cess marriage began to take shape. They spoke of a man who was deeply in love with his wife, a man who would never have willingly caused her any distress. They spoke of a marriage that was, from their perspective, a happy and stable one. The first major breakthrough in the case came from an unlikely source, the Vances' credit card statement. A detective with a keen eye for detail noticed a series of unusual purchases made in the week before David's disappearance. A large, industrial-grade freezer, a heavy-duty meat grinder, a bulk order of sausage casings, and a set of butcher's knives that were far more professional than anything a home cook would ever need. When questioned about the purchases, Eleanor had a ready explanation. She was an amateur charcutier, she had explained, a hobby she had recently taken up. She had been planning to surprise David with a batch of homemade sausages, his favorite food. The explanation was plausible, but it didn't sit right with the detectives. It was too neat, too convenient. The detectives decided to execute a search warrant on the Vances' home. The house, on the surface, was immaculate. There was no sign of a struggle, no evidence of foul play. But in the basement, a forensics team made a gruesome discovery. Using a specialized chemical agent, they sprayed the concrete floor. Under the glow of a blacklight, a large, dark stain appeared, a silent testament to the bloody horror that had unfolded in that very spot. The stain had been scrubbed clean, but the chemical agent revealed the faint, indelible traces of human blood. The evidence was circumstantial, but it was enough to bring Eleanor in for questioning. The interrogation was a battle of wills. Eleanor was calm. She was composed. She was unwavering in her denials. She was the grieving wife, a victim of a terrible misunderstanding. She was, in short, a brilliant actress. But the detectives were persistent. They pressed her. They questioned her. They poked holes in her story. They showed her the evidence from the basement, the credit card statements, the testimonies of her husband's friends and family. For hours, she held her ground. The perfect facade remained intact. But then, one of the detectives, a seasoned veteran with a knack for reading people, decided to change tactics. He didn't accuse her, he didn't raise his voice. He spoke to her in a soft, gentle tone. He spoke of the years of suppressed anger, the emotional abuse, the slow, agonizing death of her spirit. He spoke to the woman behind the mask, the woman who had been pushed to the brink. And then, something inside her broke. The dam of her composure cracked, and the years of suppressed emotions came flooding out. The tears that streamed down her face were not the crocodile tears of a grieving widow, but the raw, agonizing sobs of a woman who had finally been seen. In a voice that was barely a whisper, she began to confess. She told them everything: the years of abuse, the planning, the murder, the dismemberment, the sausages, the trip to Chicago. The confession was a torrent of words, a release of the poison that had been festering inside her for so long. The perfect facade had finally crumbled, revealing the dark and twisted reality that lay beneath. The news of Eleanor Vance's confession sent shockwaves through the quiet community of Maple Creek. The story was a media sensation, a gruesome tale of suburban horror that captivated the nation. The headlines were sensational, the details of the crime laid bare for a horrified public. The sausage-making killer, the butcher of Maple Creek, the housewife from hell, these were the names the media had given her, reducing her to a caricature of a monstrous villain. The trial was a spectacle. The courtroom was packed every day, a macabre theater where the gruesome details of David Vance's murder were played out for a captivated audience. The prosecution painted a picture of a cold, calculating killer, a woman who had meticulously planned and executed the murder of her husband in the most brutal way imaginable. They presented the evidence: the bloodstains in the basement, the credit card statements, the testimonies of the stray dog's unlikely discovery of the sausages. They played Eleanor's videotaped confession, her calm, detached voice narrating the horrific details of her crime. Eleanor's defense team, on the other hand, argued that she was a victim of years of psychological abuse, a woman who had been driven to the brink of insanity by her husband's cruelty. They brought in expert witnesses, psychologists who testified to the devastating effects of gaslighting and emotional manipulation. They painted a picture of a woman who had been living in a private hell, a woman who had snapped under the immense pressure of her tormented life. Eleanor herself was a stoic and enigmatic figure throughout the trial. She sat in the courtroom, her face a mask of serene composure, her eyes betraying no emotion. She listened to the gruesome testimony, the sensational headlines, the public condemnation, with a chilling detachment. It was as if she was watching a play about someone else's life, a tragic story that had no connection to her own. The jury, in the end, was swayed by the sheer brutality of the crime. The years of abuse, while tragic, could not excuse the horrific nature of her actions. They found her guilty of first-degree murder, and the judge, calling her actions an affront to human decency, sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The aftermath of the trial left a permanent scar on the community of Maple Creek. The charming Victorian house on the corner of Elm Street became a macabre tourist attraction, a place where people would drive by and whisper about the horrific crime that had taken place within its walls. The story of Eleanor and David Vance became a local legend, a cautionary tale about the darkness that can lurk behind even the most perfect of facades. In prison, Eleanor became a model inmate. She was quiet, she was respectful, she kept to herself. She spent her days in the prison library, losing herself in the world of books. She never spoke of her crime, never showed any remorse. It was as if the woman who had committed that horrific act had ceased to exist, replaced by a hollow, empty shell. The story of Eleanor Vance is a chilling reminder that the line between love and hate, between sanity and madness, is often razor-thin. It is a story about the corrosive nature of secrets, the devastating effects of emotional abuse, and the terrifying capacity for darkness that exists within the human heart. It is a story that will forever haunt the quiet suburb of Maple Creek, a gruesome tale whispered in the shadows, a permanent stain on the town's idyllic facade. And it is a story that serves as a chilling warning. You never truly know what goes on behind closed doors.